welcome to my series on fundamental movement. Fundamental movement are elementary movement patterns that help release us from habitual patterns that maybe don't serve our body function. They're sometimes known as compensation patterns. And learning these fundamental movement patterns will help you create more efficient patterns of movement. So they're very subtle. They could fall, I guess, into somatic movement, very simple movement that's done with breath and intention to help center and concentrate yourself. It takes a lot of concentration to do it. Some reasons on why I really appreciate and value fundamental movement is that it helps bring my mind and body to the center of my practice. Especially when I'm starting a session, it gets my mindset out of that of being the doer to that of being the observer and curious about my practice for that day. It helps to refine specific aspects of an exercise. So let's say I struggle with articulation, then perhaps I will do a fundamental that will support me in articulation before I start my practice, just to help me be mindful about that. It teaches primary biomechanics of an exercise. It enhances my movement quality. It helps me improve my technique and performance. So, for example, sometimes it's difficult for me to hold my pelvis in stability. I can have almost too much flexibility in my pelvic area. So we're going to talk about knee spreads today. If I do some knee spreads in the beginning, it'll help me be mindful of my pelvic area, of creating pelvic stability. And so then that just brings it to the forefront of my mind. It also helps us to identify and strengthen weak links in that particular movement pattern and to work with our own individual needs. So as I alluded to a minute ago, today we'll be exploring knee folds, and the benefits to doing knee folds is that it helps you create a feeling of freedom in the hip when you're doing abduction and adduction. So let's talk about that for a minute. Abduction is moving the leg away from an item away from the center line of the body, and adduction is moving it towards the center line of the body. So that's an easy way to remember it. And I know with my accent, sometimes it's hard in my A's and O's, so I may refer to it as abduction and adduction versus saying abduction and adduction. Sometimes I think it's a little easier to understand what I'm trying to say if I slow down a little bit. So it's also improving your trunk stability during AB and adduction. So we'll start in constructive rest position, which is lying down on our back or supine with our knees bent, our feet flat on the floor. And remember, if you need some head support with a rolled towel or a small pillow, please give yourself permission to do that. And back at the beginning of this series, we talked about imprinting the spine and just letting gravity support you and honoring our curves in our spine, and that's how we'll start here. All right, so I'm just taking a moment to have knees bent, about 1 to 2 fist distances between the feet. My feet are parallel, my knees are up to the ceiling. I find my arms comfortably at my side with the pinky side of the hand down and my throat open, space between the upper and lower jaw, and the tip of the tongue behind the 2 front teeth. And I'll find my breath. And then as I find my breath, I can notice that my spine is beginning to imprint. So I have my natural lumbar curve, my natural cervical curve. There's space there. They're not touching the mat, but there's no tension. I've let everything relax down onto the mat as far as my pelvis and my ribs and the spine that runs between my ribs, my shoulders, my cranium. All right? So remember, I am trying to connect with you, which is why I turn my head, but you would still keep your head in alignment. All right, so let's start with one leg. It doesn't matter which, because we'll do both. But allow the foot to roll out to the pinky side. Now the leg that's not moving, that knee is still facing up towards the ceiling, and the pelvis is remaining heavy on the mat. And then you'll slowly draw it back up. So again, it's taking some trunk stability to hold that together, to move in that part. And then back. So it's as if you're prying your knees apart, keeping the pelvis nice and still. And then pressing the knees back together. And you're just breathing naturally. Let's do one more on this side, and then we'll move to the other side. So again, this side stays nice and still. My pelvis is staying still. I'm keeping weight into this leg. On the moving leg, I'm rolling to the pinky side of my foot, and I'm keeping the movement in a range that I can control all this trunk stability. Just working with one breath, one movement. I'm noticing any subtle shifts that are happening in my body. And then you can start to move them together. And listen to the quality of the movement from one hip to the other. Alright, so I hope that helps you to explore a little bit of knee spreads and to help you learn to stabilize your trunk as those limbs are moving. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Fundamental series.